All right, hey, thanks for tuning in. Welcome to the Growth Project, a podcast by AMPLOS. My name is Cory Shaffer, joined today by Dr. Milt Lowder. Milt, what's up?
How you doing, Cory?
So a reminder to our listeners, or if you're tuning in for the first time, here at AMPLOS, we are interested in your personal and professional growth. We're all about pursuing better. And so if you are tuning in, hopefully that's what you came for, because that's what we are going to dish out with our topic today.
Yeah, and so always excited about a chance to share with you. We hopefully bring ideas that are relevant and encouraging to you and where you are. And so, Cory, today's ended up being an interesting conversation. We were trying to brainstorm topics, kind of stumbled upon two that are we think relevant. One was defeat doubt, and the other title would be fearless. And your comments to me were, hey, they both kind of missed the mark.
Yeah, I think they're really interesting and probably topics that don't get discussed much just because of the nature of them. Maybe a little bit taboo to talk about something like fear, whether it's because like, hey, that's not what elite performers do, or that's not what high achievers do, or something like that. But yeah, that was my initial thought around it, and just looking at these topics, or at least the titles of those topics, what those conversations could be, is the idea of being fearless. I mean, you mentioned it initially, just like it's human nature to experience fear.
Yeah.
So being fearless is, I'm not really sure if that's an attainable goal. And defeating doubt, I think, is just not the right phrase to capture the spirit of what we hope this conversation becomes. It's more, how do I shift doubt, channel it appropriately? And again, we'll sort of flesh that out here as we go. But I hope just some, interesting ideas and the topic overall for our listeners. So
yeah, so of course I'm thinking in terms of a quote, and Mr. Wrigley, I don't know Mr. Wrigley's first name, but I imagine Wrigley Field said one's doubts and fears are their own worst enemy. One's doubts and fears, and I think maybe what you and I hope to offer through today's podcast is one's doubts and fears can be their own worst enemy. However, one's doubts and fears can be what moves them to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as you said, what is required is a shift in a mindset, a shift in the way we look at our doubts, look at our fears, how we interpret them, and how we move forward with them.
Okay, where do you want to start?
Doubt to me, let's start with doubt. When you think about doubt versus fear, where does doubt come from? Why does it exist? How are you and I framing doubt in terms of today's conversation?
I mean, I put it just in like a one short phrase. Doubt is more, I'm not sure that I have what it takes to accomplish something, to do the thing, whatever it might be. But it really seems to come from such a position of weakness.
Yeah.
That's the initial. It's almost like I've already made up in my mind that I might not have the resources available to overcome whatever challenge is in front of me.
Yeah, and so this kind of negative self-talk, this negative self-view of yourself, and as you said, the interesting language that I think is important is position of weakness. And where does doubt come from? Well, to me, when I have that lens, when I'm looking at myself, when I'm comparing myself, that position of weakness, I start asking questions from that position. And when I do, such as, and we talk about this all the time, have you ever heard a prepared person ask, am I prepared? Or a successful person ask, am I successful? Or a happy person ask, am I happy? Or do I have what it takes? The moment you start asking those questions, that doubt creeps in. And your brain, just the way it is wired, is automatically telling you, no, you don't have what it takes. No, you aren't prepared. No, you aren't successful. No, you aren't happy. And so you're stuck with this, these overwhelming thoughts that lead to emotions, which leads to hesitation and inaction, and a lot of less than feelings, I guess, of being less than.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I guess fear, starting with fear, just real quick, is a basic universal human emotion. Like, it's wired into us as human beings. We know that. Research supports it and so on. Doubt is really interesting. It's like how fear perpetuates itself in 2024.
Yeah.
It's like new age fear, because it's like our internal narrative and our internal dialogue around something that otherwise maybe it's just something that I can be fearful of. And we'll talk about how to leverage fear. But doubt is, maybe you mentioned this earlier, maybe this is the best way to explain it, is doubt is just so much more of an internal process where I'm questioning, as you mentioned, again, do I have what it takes, or am I prepared, or whatever it might be. So these two are related. To me, fear is a normal, natural thing.
Yeah.
It's almost like if I'm feeling doubt, it's because I've chosen to feel it, right? And I've chosen this path in my mind, maybe not fully consciously, but where I'm taking this negative turn and just starting to ask those questions, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and I think maybe how we want you to start thinking about fear is it is a basic human emotion. Our brains are wired, and it fuels us, that fight or flight mentality. It fuels us into action for the most part. But to me, the doubt, how do you defeat doubt? Maybe not, what is the defeat doubt is not the right term. How do I deal with it? Is it's okay to ask those questions, which you're saying, and I think is a healthy sense of fear.
Mm-hmm.
But asking those questions from a position of strength.
Correct. Yeah.
That it lets me face the brutal truth. It lets me look at what is challenging me. It helps me create a plan of action to overcome that fear. Where the asking the questions from a position of weakness really just keeps me stuck.
Yes. Yeah. So again, if doubt is I'm not sure I have what it takes, fear is just I'm not sure how it'll turn out.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by it's like I've put my own personal spin on whatever the situation is, and it's like this degree now to where it's really unhelpful. But if we can choose to look at fear for what it is and keep it at this level of like, hey, I'm not sure how this is going to turn out, but choose to sort of step into that, it can actually push you forward toward action, towards the kind of behavior that will help deal with or overcome whatever that fear is. And so a couple of different directions I wanted to take this conversation in, or a couple of different examples or sources, so to speak. One, we'll start with the most academic. For those of you who have seen the movie The Dark Knight Rises, right? Batman film.
I have seen that. I know you're questioning me.
No. I'm just so within that, if you recall, there's a scene where Christian Bale as Batman is stuck in that like prison. Right, it's underground, and you can climb out. Okay, and he continues to try to train, and he's building his body up so that he can make this big jump and climb out of the prison. And the old man who's in there with him, who clearly has been around and seen some things and heard some things, what he says to him, he says, "How can you move faster than possible, fight longer than possible, without the most powerful impulse of the spirit, the fear of death?" And his point is, you're trying to make this jump, but you have a safety net. You know that the rope is always going to save you if you miss. And the point is, until you get rid of the rope, you're not even fully tapping into what you're capable of. Like, you're not leveraging the most powerful emotion that you have inside you. And so, of course, in the movie, right, he does the jump without the rope. He jumps, he gets out, right? But the point, and I think that's a really cool way of framing this.
Yeah, so good.
Is if you can capture that and harness that, it's pretty powerful. And there's a lot of truth. I know it's just a line in a movie, but there's a ton of truth to what he's saying.
So read that again.
So he says, how can you move faster than possible, fight longer than possible, without the most powerful impulse of the spirit? And in this case, of course, the fear of death. But the fear, period, right? Fear, if used appropriately, if channeled, if kind of directed in the right direction, is an extremely, extremely beneficial emotion.
Yeah, and just think, and probably Batman was probably not the most academic, right? Have I got that right?
That was a joke, yeah.
So I thought you were coming back with Jim Collins or the HBR group around it. But to me, why is that important? Well, fear produces adrenaline. Like when your brain perceives a threat, adrenaline floods the body and activates everything you need to fight longer, live longer, go farther than when you don't. And I think that, what we got to really ask ourselves now is, what are we holding on to that's holding us back? Mm-hmm. What is that thing that is really keeping me from from pushing me to my upper limit, from pushing me to be better, pursue better, that I just have not given it my full sense. And what that has said is probably we don't have a healthy sense of paranoia. Probably don't have a healthy sense of urgency. We may have gotten a little too complacent in the world that we're in.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I of course joke about, Batman being academic, but there is actually research to back this. So author Jim Collins, you mentioned him, writer of Good to Great, Built to Last. Great by choice is where this research comes from. And so in his research of companies who in his mind were great by choice, okay, meaning they did the things that were within their control just better than everybody else. And as a result, they sort of, improved leaps and bounds over their competitors. One of the things that he found of these companies who were successful through really dynamic, changing environments was what he referenced as productive paranoia. So there was always this underlying sense, you said, like sense of urgency, sense of nervousness to a degree around complacency, around market trends, around even their own success, right? Like they were always extremely, extremely mindful of these things and sort of on the lookout. And I mean, to a degree, it almost sounds, glass half empty, right? Hey, we're really good, but we are like one bad business decision away from being really bad. And so we're going to just sort of stay on edge, but it was the thing that just kept them moving. It was the thing that forced them to continue to put themselves under the microscope to see how they could do things better, how they could be more efficient, more productive, like improve processes, improve systems. It was all stemming from this underlying paranoia around it could all go away.
Yeah.
And so again, like that's coming from research in, these great companies. I think there's something at the individual level that we can learn from that.
Yeah, from an existential perspective, thinking about channeling that fear of the difference between being content and being satisfied. Like we don't want you to go through life not being content, right? That, hey, you're grateful for who you are and what you have, but the healthy sense of paranoia is not being satisfied. It's a sense that this could all go away if we aren't striving to get better, if we aren't striving to improve, if we aren't trying to outwork our competition. I think that's what drove, and I think you said it's the missing ingredient that too many of us fail to create or have a sense of appreciation for. Not that the glass is half full, but a sense of humility and understanding, hey, there's things that have put us in this position that are outside of our control. We better work really hard to do the things we can control.
Yeah. And at the individual level, a cool example of this, and I've shared this with plenty of our clients, probably some of our listeners will recall this, but there's a great little video of Mike Tyson. And we're talking Mike Tyson in his prime, probably late 80s, early 90s. And essentially, it's just a minute or two long, but he's kind of describing the real present fear that he had leading into every fight. And I mean, this is the baddest dude on the planet.
Yeah.
When he was at his peak and really ascending in the boxing world, nobody wanted to fight him. But he was terrified because it's like he was almost questioning, could this be the guy to beat me? Could he be the one? And I'm not sure if he ever said, I don't have what it takes, right? The doubt piece.
Yes.
But there was a real sense of like understanding, and it's kind of rooted in humility of like, this could be the guy to beat me. And so what it did was it just it drove his preparation. And that dude worked his absolute tail off. And that's why he became, and was for a long time, the best fighter in the world. But such a cool example of this dude at the peak of his powers to be able to say, like, yeah, I was terrified. Like, I was afraid to lose. But the fear of losing is what drove him to work as hard as he did.
Yeah, and so I think to me, go back to what the main question people were asking me when Mike Tyson was in his prime, and I'm sure your friends asked you, would you get in the ring with Mike Tyson for $1 million? Like, how much money would it take for you to get? And the answer for me was always no, because the doubt was, like, I don't have what it takes. And I'm not sure there was any doubt, but there was enough fear and doubt. I was certain of the outcome that getting in the ring with him could be deadly. But I love that play on, like, that fear motivated him because he interpreted it the right way.
Yes.
It didn't create the self-doubt, or if it did, the doubt did not last because he took action.
Yeah.
And too many times in our own life, we create this sense of fear that is, well, we don't create it, we experience. As you said, one of the 5 basic human emotions, one of the strongest human emotions is fear. But what that does is what we tend to do is it becomes so much doubt that we don't take action.
Yep.
And we create a narrative around ourselves, around who we are, around our business, that we don't have what it takes.
Right. And so I think part of this and the application of this for our listeners in terms of a take-home message is if you find yourself doubting, it's just a matter of like, take a step back, bring some perspective, challenge the doubt.
Yeah.
Right. If you can challenge and sort of see like, okay, where am I putting a spin on this that it's turned to fear into doubt? And if you can get back to the core of just what am I afraid of?
Yes.
Now I can leverage that to hopefully drive some action forward.
And if you want to hit pause right now and answer that question, what are you so scared of? What scares you the most? What are you most fearful of? And let that kind of sit with you a little bit. And then hopefully we can give you some ideas of how to overcome that fear. Building upon previous messaging, though, that we really believe in, we talk about self-efficacy, like it's one of the greatest predictors of what we perceive as success. And what is self-efficacy? I believe I have what it takes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talk about the antidote to doubt is self-efficacy. What you're saying is, what are the reasons to believe? How do I challenge some of the lies that this fear is creating in me that I'm telling myself and overcome it with what I know to be true, with who I am, that I believe my effort and my preparation can lead to success?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in the case of Tyson, it's, and what's really cool, even just to come back to this for a minute, there was the fear that was driving him, that was making him work hard and so on. But what he talks about is then on fight night, like every step he got closer to the ring, it's like all of his inner dialogue just shifted to how confident he was. It like in a switch, like in an instant, because it's like we're finally now in the moment and there's no way that this dude outworked me. Like I know I'm prepared. I know I have what it takes. And so I think that's the point, is if you can acknowledge and if you can get to the core of whatever the fear is, work towards action, preparation, whatever, I think what ends up coming out of it in the long run, if you give that time, is confidence.
Yes.
And that's ultimately what he was describing. He went from being fearful to being confident in a matter of a couple months of really hard, intense training because he trained intense and hard, right? So like when he needed it most, he could rely on that confidence. He kind of earned the right to talk to himself in this really credible, more positive way. So again, I think the point here is fear is this really powerful emotion that can, if channeled appropriate, like it can channel appropriate action and preparation and so on. It is sort of having enough respect, in the Tyson's case, let's say, respect for the opponent, respect for the situation, respect for, as I noted before, if we're talking just big picture, like respect for the market, respect for the economy, whatever. There's a humility involved, I think, to acknowledge that there's something I'm fearful of. And then I think ultimately all of this, and the point here is like, it should be driving you to act.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to sit in that fear necessarily. So it should be, instead of like, do I have what it takes? You should be asking yourself like, okay, what can I do first?
Yeah.
Like, how do I get started?
Yeah, go back to like awareness without action only increases your level of anxiety and frustration. So the first step of humility, Cory, and we see a lot of people to have the humility and vulnerability is like, hey, I'm not quite sure, or I don't know what it takes, or address the fear, but they don't ever take any action. And really, that leaves you worse off than you were before, because now you're very aware that you aren't doing the very thing that could help you overcome the fear.
Yep.
And so I love the language of humility as we face fear. We're all going to experience fear. It's one of those 5 emotions. Being aware of that, the action then, what is a question you just asked? What is the one thing I can do? What action will I take to overcome that fight or flight response?
Yep. And then if you can just stack off, the days in which you're taking the right appropriate action, it's amazing how, again, on the other side of that is like, hey, I'm starting to feel a little bit better about this. Yeah. I'm starting to feel a little bit more confident. So I guess just to round out my academic sources here, from Batman to Jim Collins, Harvard Business Review did do an article. We've talked about this on the podcast, I'm sure, several different stages, but I did want to bring this back up. I think it is relevant. In HBR's article they did on centennial organizations back in 2018. Centennial as in organizations that had achieved and sustained a certain level of success for at least 100 years. One of these 6 variables that they found about these organizations that they all had in common was a level of nervousness about how they did things. And so their phrase, but like in particular, they were nervous about getting bigger.
Yeah.
And so their mantra was more, we're trying to be better, not bigger. But I bring that up just because, again, like 3 certainly very different sources, 2 of them very credible. One of them,
maybe more inspiring.
Based on a movie and a, comic book. But the point is, there's something here that we should be paying attention to, and we should not. The idea of being fearless just misses the mark. If anything, it's that we should be fearless about facing fear.
Yes.
Like we need to be better and lean into fear, and that's uncomfortable. But to step one, kind of acknowledge it, like you mentioned, like, hey, there's something here that I might be afraid of, and something that's probably holding me back, that's pushing doubt as opposed to, or that I've turned into doubt.
Yeah, I love that language of, you said doubt is a choice. We're always going to experience fear, and there may be some like you asked a question, do I have what it takes? Well, who are you comparing yourself to? But that can lead to inaction. And so if I can look at that fear, I can overcome the doubt with the truth. Well, what are the things I know to be true? What are the things I can do? What are the reasons to believe in me? What are the reasons to believe I have what it takes? Then that's that action plan. And those things have to be within your control. I think that's why the Centennial companies lasted so long, and I love that you referenced that again. But to me, that sense of nervousness didn't lead to doubt.
Mm-hmm.
It led them to take action, to try new things, to be innovative from a position of strength. And too many times that doubt, we just try to hold on to what we have, and we know what that decline looks like.
Yeah.
Then you become irrelevant. Then you don't accomplish what you want to accomplish. Then you live with a lot of regret. Then you live with a lot of guilt.
All right, so how do we want to close this thing out, Milt? I know we took a look at each of these, hopefully, broke that down in a way that makes sense for our listeners, but where do we go from here?
Yeah, so to me, I think the main questions you really want to ask yourself is, how has the fear turned into doubt into your, like, what are things you're fearful of? And how have you let that fear turn into doubt? And what's the narrative? What's your interpretation of who you are and what you're trying to accomplish? And if it becomes these questions from a position of weakness, do I have what it takes? Am I prepared? Are we going to be successful? Can we keep doing this? And you're asking that from a position of weakness, that's probably doubt. And that doubt is leading to hesitation and inaction. Conversely, if you're facing the fear, and you're going to use your language, fear as fuel, what are the things I'm really afraid of? What am I most afraid of losing? And how do I channel that in such a way that lets me, to our Batman, go longer, fight longer, jump higher, and accomplish what I want to accomplish, because I've channeled that energy into an appropriate way.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess my final thoughts here in similar, sentiment, but this is probably going to start first and foremost with just taking a hard look in the mirror and, engaging in some reflection to get at the core of what am I afraid of? Or maybe you're not really sure of what you're afraid of, but start looking at those areas of your life where there's something that you want to be doing, you quote should be doing or could be doing, but you just haven't committed to it.
Yes.
It's almost like you've danced around it, or there's been a lack of conviction towards it. It probably means there's doubt there. And so, okay, I acknowledge there's an area of my life here where there's a little bit of doubt. I wonder what the narrative is I'm telling myself, and what is it that I'm really afraid of? Like it's cutting to the core to get to that point. I'll give just one final example here. Sales organization that I work with, this was put pretty well by one of their more seasoned veteran brokers or producers, and he just mentioned, I kind of challenged them. We did a little bit of mid-year reflection, like we've talked about on the podcast here recently. And of course it's, hey, what's working and why is it working? But then, all right, what are some of the challenges? Where have you not made as much progress as you'd like? What's getting in the way? And his point, which was great, was just like, I think when it comes to what we do, the number one activity you need to be engaged in is cold calling. If you're not making cold calls, you're getting in your own way.
Yeah.
You have everything that you need to do it, but it's amazing how, which kind of fits this conversation, when there's doubt, you just don't make the calls. And what you'll end up doing, and he noted this, which I thought was great, was like, it's amazing how you can find yourself busy, for the entire week and have excuses as to why you didn't make your calls. But at the core of it, like we're talking about, is the fear there is like being told no. You're afraid of probably not getting the sale. You're afraid of the rejection. And that was my point, was just like, man, the only way you're ever going to overcome it is to lean into it.
Yeah.
Right? And acknowledge that. But the point is like taking this conversation into consideration. Okay, if I can acknowledge and at least be aware of, hey, I'm holding myself back, right? I've let doubt creep in instead of just the fear of like, yeah, I might hear some no's, but let's just embrace that.
Yeah.
And make the calls and see what happens over time. Like that was his point.
And I think what you just said is also human nature. When I experience that fear and that doubt, it's really easy to get busy doing things that don't matter, things that don't move the needle. And we can make excuses, I'm just so busy, but I'm not doing busy the very thing that could help propel me closer to achieving my dream and becoming who I want to be. I think that's where we really want to be mindful and aware of. We're going to experience fear. It's going to turn into doubt. Okay, now what? And how do we create an action plan to eliminate that fear and that doubt so it is not my own worst enemy, so it's not holding me back?
Yeah, there's a lot of honesty and humility involved with acknowledging and saying out loud even like, man, I'm afraid of this.
Yeah.
But that's the absolute thing that I think is necessary and that you need to do, because then you can start to get to work.
Yeah, and so what I would encourage you, our listeners, to think about, be honest with yourself, and then find someone that you can trust and say, hey, I've just been reflecting. I love that this person sat down with you and was reflecting that and evaluating and say, what am I really scared of? What's really holding me back? What are the reasons where's doubt crept in? And what are the reasons to believe? But what's that one thing I could do that I'm really scared of doing that could be the ticket to places I've only dreamed of going? And so, hey, thanks as always for listening. If you don't mind, if you like what you hear, please like us. Is that the right terminology?
Rate and review.
Yeah, rate and review. Forget the like us. The rate and review, please do that. And please send us your ideas, topics. These are internal ideas, doubt and fear. If you find something of interest, if you want us to take a deeper dive, please share that with us as well. So thank you for listening. And until we meet again, continue to be better and pursue better.